Alright, so we're moving on, and we're going to start talking about the Constitution and how it affects regulation in business. Believe it or not, the United States Constitution is the oldest constitutional document still in continuous use in the entire world. In fact, it's been referred to as a living document, and that's sort of an interesting way to look at it. As we go through time, there have been numerous interpretations of what the Constitution means, and as such it has evolved because of constitutional interpretation, and that's why they refer to it as a living document. The Constitution itself provides the legal framework for our federal government and the authority it has to regulate business activities. And that's pretty much the first articles of the Constitution actually do set up the government. And then the amendments, like the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, give us our personal freedoms. Now, separation of power. This is probably something you learned in high school government. The success of the constitutional experiment was founded in the division of powers. What we have is checks and balances. Basically, you have three branches of government. You got three people here. Okay, you have the legislative branch. They make the rules. The judicial branch. They interpret the rules. And then you have the executive branch that carries out the rules. And they all have checks and balances. For example, the legislative branch, needs the executive branch to sign off on what they're doing. And if you have a law, then there's need for judicial interpretation. But it could be override by the people of Congress. And the Congress can also overrule the president. Okay, so there's all sorts of checks and balances whenever you talk about the government. And this was done on purpose so that no one part of the government could take over the rest. And that's a really interesting thing to have. You don't want government with too much power. What you want, in theory, is just enough government to protect the people. Federalism is separate and distinct roles at the levels of government. I just talked about that with checks and balances. Now, the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution lays out the fact that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And that's pretty powerful. Certainly you don't want states, being able to make laws that trump the federal government. That would just not be good. If that were the case, Georgia would probably secede. Bad joke. But Chuck Norris would tell you that Texas wants to succeed. Now, another interesting clause associated with the Constitution is the Contracts Clause. States cannot pass law that impact rights and duties under existing contracts. And this is good. You don't want states interfering, but you do have the federal government interfere from time to time, and they'll put embargoes on trade and whatnot, with foreign countries, and do that to try to, punish people overseas. This may not apply in emergencies. Certainly, there's always emergency situations where the states need to step in and take care of things. Now, amendments and basic protections. Keep in mind, especially as we go through this stuff, nothing is absolute. When you talk about law and checks and balances and the Constitution, you'll find that there's always a happy medium. People try to balance things out, especially with public policy. You want to remove issues from the political process, but again, this is going to vary during emergencies. But let's look at some of these amendments and see if we can start putting some of this together. First Amendment is out there, and this is probably the one that most of y'all are familiar with. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. Certainly, freedom of religion it's an important thing. It's why a lot of our founding fathers came over here. They wanted to be free from persecution for their religion. So this goes to establishment of religion, free exercise of religion, and also even employment discrimination. You can't discriminate because of someone's religion. Just because you go to the Baptist church doesn't mean you're evil, okay? Just because you're a good Catholic doesn't mean you're evil. Even if you worship at the Church of Many Faces, it's not evil. But you also have freedom of the press, and some of you probably think, well, doesn't the press have a little bit too much power? Well, arguably, the press could be another check on the government. They've organized scrutiny on the government. Now, they're not absolute. There are some restraints. They can't be obscene. They can't defame. And if you're going to say something about a public figure that isn't true, there has to be actual malice. So all these things lead you to conclude that, hey, the press does have a certain say in what goes on, and they do have the right to speak the truth. Likewise, individuals, we have freedom of speech, symbolic speech. A really good discussion I had in law school was freedom of speech as to burning of the flag. Is burning of the flag speech, or is it degradation of the symbol? What about overbreadth doctrine? Can you go so far with speech that it's so overbreadth you don't know what it is? Commercial speech. We have freedom to say what we want to sell. Now, can we lie? No. It's there to protect corporations. It includes freedom of information. Certainly we have rights to information. Now, unprotected speech, fighting words, right? I'm going to kick your ever-living, words inciting violence. I'm going to blow up this building, okay? Defamation, obscenities. All these things, they're not protected speech. We also have a right to assemble, all right? Certainly the government cannot stop us from, all of us meeting together and hanging out in Eternia, okay? It's okay, all right? If you want to go to a comic book store and hang out, it's okay, all right? If you want to get with your friends and debate whether or not Man-E-Faces is superior to Buzz-Off, you can do that, all right? You have the right to petition for redress, all right? So, hey, this is what we want, all right? Second Amendment. Right to possess guns. Now, when we talk about this, keep in mind it actually goes to a militia. However, you still do have a right to bear arms. And in 2008, individuals may have handguns in homes for self-defense. Folks, I would say most of us own weapons. Okay, we own guns, but it's a debate that has not stopped. Especially in light of recent events throughout the country. Now, the 14th Amendment is a very interesting amendment. The 14th Amendment adds in due process as to the states. Now, believe it or not, you're entitled to proper notice in a hearing. You also right to property rights affected by government action. The 5th Amendment is going to apply to the federal, but the 14th is going to be at the local. Now, this is what you call the incorporation doctrine. And basically what happened is we had all these individual freedoms, the first 10 amendments, and that was free from the federal government. Right to searches and seizures, or right to be free from searches and seizures under the federal government. However, that didn't apply to the states until the 14th Amendment came along. Once the 14th Amendment came along, the incorporation doctrine kicks in and says, hey, these individual freedoms that we have are also applied to the states. And just about all of them have come about. One of the few that hasn't is your right to a jury. That has not come up yet. So under state law, you can be convicted by 6 people, depending on the rules in your state. Also, you have equal protection. You have minimum rationale, meaning that the feds can do anything they want, but you also have strict scrutiny. You have to have a compelling state purpose. And when you talk about things with strict scrutiny, you have to talk about things associated with discrimination based on race, based on gender, any of your fundamental rights. The only way they can be taken away is through strict scrutiny. You also have quasi-strict scrutiny, and it's pretty much just like what it says. But all in all, the Constitution has it's an interesting document, and it was created in such a way that it can actually evolve over time. And these amendments that we've made have allowed the Constitution to grow, to change, to be interpreted. And again, that's what makes it such an interesting document. I encourage you to sit down and actually read it forward to back. It's an interesting read. You'll probably learn quite a bit from it.